Hello everyone, Natnu here, and welcome to Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle. Today, I'm going to be doing something a little different. This is a beginner's guide for the Versus mode of the game. Versus mode is a local player versus player mode. That it does require two controllers. However, unlike the main game, you can actually use a single Joy-Con as a controller. See? However, you cannot use any controllers that are built into the system. For example, the controller that's built into the Switch Lite does not work. I will be just jumping into a match here real quick. We'll go over all the settings and all that in a bit. Alright. Now, as you can see, each team has 3 heroes. The objective of Versus mode is to knock out all your opponent's 3 heroes before they knock out yours. Last team standing wins. There is one other way to win, though. Now, in the settings, you can turn on a turn limit, and you can see it in the top right how we have 10 turns. When the turn limit runs out, the team that has the most heroes remaining wins. The remaining HP does not matter. As long as the hero is alive, they still count. Most heroes wins. If the turn limit runs out and the two sides are tied for heroes, then the game will go into overtime, and it will add 1 extra turn to the game. If at the end of this turn, one team has more heroes than the other, then they win. If the players are still tied, it adds another turn, and so on and so forth. There doesn't seem to be a limit to how many turns it can add. Now, while combat in Versus mode might seem identical to the main game, there are a few differences. Now, the main difference between combat in the main game and combat in Versus mode is action tickets. At the start of each turn, you get 3 action tickets, and you can see them in the top left. Now, watch what happens when I move a character. We now only have 2 action tickets. Whenever you move a character, use a weapon, or use a technique, that costs 1 action ticket. When you run out of action tickets, your turn is passed. Effectively, you can only do 3 actions per turn. This, as you can imagine, has a big impact on Versus mode's combat. For example, M-Power. M-Power powers up weapons. However, M-Power doesn't do anything by itself. In order to use this thing and get actual value out of it, you have to use M-Power and then use a weapon afterwards. Otherwise, it's not powering anything up. However, that costs minimum 2 action tickets, which makes techniques such as M-Power and Itchy Feet a lot harder to use. On the flip side, movement damage is much more valuable. This is because you are not only dealing damage to stuff, but you're also moving your character in a single action ticket. It's quite efficient. Now, this also makes good defensive positions more valuable than usual. This is because if a character is in a good defensive position, they often don't need to move, which is good because you don't have to spend any action tickets moving them. Figuring out which characters need the action tickets at any given time is very important, and figuring out which characters don't need action tickets at any given time is equally important. Because if you have a really good play, but it costs all 3 action tickets to do, that's going to be your entire turn, so you need to make sure that play is worth it. If you can get that down to 2 action tickets, that can be quite a bit better, because you can use the 3rd action ticket to, like, do something defensive or whatever. Or make it even stronger, or you get the picture. Now, one other thing to note is that you always get 3 action tickets in all circumstances at the start of your turn. Even if you have a character fainted, you still get 3 action tickets as well. Like, you don't lose an action ticket because the character fainted. You get 3 no matter what in all circumstances. Another fun mechanic you get to take advantage of in Versus mode is trampolines. Now, trampolines, whenever you walk onto them, you can take a 6-cell sort of team jump kind of thing. This has properties similar to a team jump. However, there's not really that much to say about it because I assume you know how team jumps work. However, using a trampoline doesn't actually count as a team jump. You can't use the same trampoline twice, obviously, but you can use a trampoline and then team jump, for example. Or you can team jump first and then use a trampoline. Or you can trampoline and then team jump and then trampoline again, and because there's no limit to how many trampolines you can use per turn, do it again, and you get the picture. Now, another thing to mention is that landing from a trampoline counts as landing from a team jump. This means that, for example, whenever Yoshi lands from a trampoline, his ground pound comes out. Similarly, whenever Peach does it, she gets her heel jump. So these characters actually get access to the team jump abilities even when they can't actually team jump, or when there's no one around to team jump with. Mario, similarly, can stomp directly from a trampoline. And then just, keep going, as if nothing happened. However, he can only stomp once per turn. But he can stomp and then team jump. Mario just gets to combo all of his movement options together and just do anything he wants. The only caveat to trampoline usage is that you only get... Not every map has a trampoline. Some maps have them, some maps don't. So make sure you know what map you're playing on. The next thing I want to talk about is team building. When making a team, you have access to all 8 characters from the original game, but no Donkey Kong characters. The main game's team building restrictions do not apply. You do not have to pick Mario if you don't want to. You can pick a team of 3 Rabbids, you can put Luigi and Peach on the same team, you can do basically anything you want. Now, you cannot customize the character's skills directly. However, to compensate, every character actually has 3 different sets of skills to choose from. They're called skill sets. Every character has an all-purpose skill set, which has their abilities balanced and such. However, they also have 2 specialized skill sets designed for one role or another. Quick Draw Mario, for example, leans into Mario's versatility by having a stronger Hero Sight and M-Power, while Big Stomp Mario leans into Mario's raw damage potential, having a much stronger movement damage and melee. Now, Big Stomp Mario and Quick Draw Mario obviously play very different roles on a team, because they're specialized for different things. And this is pretty common for skill sets, where a lot of skill sets just can play wildly differently from each other, and have very different roles on a team, even from the character's other skill sets. As such, it can be kind of hard to talk about characters as a group in Versus mode, because anything I say about Big Stomp may or may not actually apply to Quick Draw, and vice versa. As such, we tend to treat every skill set as its own character of sorts. Like, we tend to treat them pretty independently of each other. That's why our tier lists rate every skill set separately. The only caveat to this is that you can't pick the same character more than once. So if you want to pick, say, Big Stomp Mario, and then you want to pick Quick Draw Mario, that's actually just not allowed. Now, skill set info should generally tell you everything you need to know about the character. However, there are a few universal statistics that I do want to highlight. For example, every character has 6 cells movement, 3 cells pipe exit, and 6 cells team jump, across the board. Additionally, every character has a high ground bonus of 1.3x, unless you're targeting a sentry where the high ground bonus is 1.5x for some reason, and they always have Cleansing Jump, or some variation of it, such as Mario's Cleansing Stomp. This is true of across the board, and skill sets do not change this. Additionally, all weapons in the game across all characters usually deal the same damage they would as a World 1 weapon. Mario's Blaster, for example, this is the damage that his World 1 blasters will do at the end of World 1. There are some exceptions. For example, weapons that aren't in World 1 at all, such as the Grenaduck, their damage scaled to what they would be as a World 1 weapon. For example, the Grenaduck does 20 to 30 because it always matches the rocket damage. The rocket is a World 1 weapon. Additionally, the Sentry has a straight up nerf in Versus mode, where it does 35 to 45 damage instead of the 45 to 55 that they usually deal in the main game. This is probably because the Sentry was too strong in Versus. However, it is also notable that in a Donkey Kong adventure, it has the same nerf, funnily enough, where it is weaker than usual, so it might have just been a general nerf the game developers wanted to do. By contrast, the Precision actually has the opposite change, where it's slightly stronger than its main game counterpart. This is probably because Luigi does need the extra damage of the Sentry, but because the Sentry was nerfed, his Precision was buffed to compensate. It does have some funny side effects, namely how the Precision and Boom Shot now deal the same damage, which means Icy Peach and Inky Luigi also deal the same damage, which is honestly really funny. Because one of them is a sniper, and the other one is a close-range character. Yeah, it's pretty funny. But regardless, that is just how the weapons work. Oh yeah, as you saw, sometimes weapons have different damage than usual. This is pretty uncommon, but a couple of skill sets do change weapon damage. The last thing that's worth mentioning is that secondary techniques rather, stuff like Empower, Heal, Weaken, Itchy Feet, those kind of techniques, they always have a range of 10 cells. To put that into context, medium range weapons also have a range of 10 cells. So these techniques have the same range as most weapons, which is very big. And it's also a lot larger than some of them have in the main game. This is largely because it's harder to move characters in Versus, so techniques are easier to use on multiple characters now, but it's still a very notable buff. Speaking of weapon ranges, I mentioned that medium range weapons always have a range of 10 cells, long range weapons such as the rocket are 15 cells, and the boom shot is 7 cells. Now, I don't have enough time to go over every skill set. That would have to be a video of its own. However, there are a few skill sets that I want to highlight in order to talk about Versus mode a little more. The first one is multi-draw Luigi. The important feature about multi-draw, first and foremost, is his reaction shot. Reminder that the Precision is even stronger in Versus mode than normal mode, and yet his Steely Stare has 3 shots that hit for 50% damage. This is ridiculously strong. Even if you can stomach the damage, his Precision also has bounce on it. It has a high chance to bounce at least once because he gets 3 chances to do it, despite its low crit rate. And if you get bounced, this cuts your movement short, effectively. So this is a very dangerous reaction shot to move through. Now remember, another human being is probably not going to blindly move through reaction shots if they can help it. But remember, if you know your opponent isn't going to move, you can probably take advantage of that. There are tons of ways to do that. You can, if your opponent's in a bad position, pop a reaction shot so that they have to either move through it or accept they're in a bad position. If you're in a bad position, you can use a reaction shot to buy yourself time, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of ways to use reaction shots like this. And a lot of characters have reaction shots. Mario, Luigi, Peach, and Yoshi all have a reaction shot naturally, so which means 12 different skill sets have at least some kind of reaction shot, at varying threat levels and all that kind of stuff. Now, you would think that a Sentry would be a get-out-of-jail-free card against reaction shots. And I mean, it is. It's the best tool against reaction shots you can have. But a Sentry, aside from being on a cooldown, by the way, still costs a weapon action, and it still costs a weapon action, which costs an action ticket. You can take advantage of that too, and there's a lot of counterplay both ways. Being able to play around reaction shots is very important in versus mode. Multi-draw Luigi is the poster child for this. Not only does he have arguably the strongest reaction shot in the game due to its range, damage, and super effect, but he also has a Sentry himself. So he's also very good at playing around his opponent's reaction shots. So in general, multi-draw Luigi is the poster child for reaction shots in versus mode, which is a very important mechanic to know about. Now, another set I want to talk about is Icy Peach. The main thing I want to highlight here are her super effects. Now, super effects have always been very good, even in the main game. However, in versus mode, they're actually even stronger, deceptively so. You would think that because everything has Cleansing Jump, they wouldn't be as strong. Especially since action ticket limits make Vamp a lot harder to use now. However, that's not really true. This is because Cleansing Jump now requires an action ticket to use, because you need to move. Which means there's now a trade-off for using it. And there are a lot of strong characters that have some pretty nasty super effects. Inky Luigi obviously has Ink. Honey can be hard to come by in versus, but there are some good Honey sets. And Icy Peach can use Freeze. Freeze probably doesn't sound very intimidating, because in the main game it isn't. However, it's actually very strong in versus mode. Aside from the fact that it's harder to remove, there are a lot of characters that have very strong techniques. I had a whole section on reaction shots earlier, and there are even some other stuff such as, Heal, Magnet Dance, just very strong techniques that Freeze just shuts off immediately. And this is mainly because of the super effect that Icy Peach is able to do this. Yes, and her high crit rates also help a lot. There's also Push and Bounce, which obviously do the same thing they do in the main mode, and they're still very good. But the reason I want to highlight Icy here is because she's using specifically Freeze, which is a super effect that doesn't do much in the main game, and she's still getting a lot of value out of it because of how versus mode operates. Now, there is one more thing I want to talk about with Icy Peach, that being her Grenade Duck. Here's the thing. You cannot shoot through cover. So if your opponent is hiding behind cover, you can't just hit them. Obviously. However, the Grenade Duck can actually do just that. If the Grenade Duck hits an opponent hiding behind cover, it still damages them. Which makes it very, very difficult to hide from Grenade Duck damage. Normally, hitting your opponent, or getting into a position where you can hit your opponent, comes with consequences, because your opponent probably won't just let you do that. But it's very, very difficult to do that with Grenade Duck damage, because you can hit them from basically anywhere on the map. The catch is that the Grenade Duck isn't very strong. However, chip damage can add up if you can do it several times. Even if you can't, it still makes characters easier to deal with, because you're still making progress, and that can set up for a KO later. In fact, there are a lot of characters that just miss out on a KO, but the Grenade Duck gets them within range again. Quake and Shake Yoshi, for example, is actually 26 damage short of being able to one-hit KO Rabbid Mario, and Rabbid Peach, with a Ground Pound plus Super Chance Rumble Bang crit. However, a Grenade Duck will always deal more than 26 damage if Icy Peach uses it. So, there you go. That makes Quake and Shake Yoshi a kill shot a lot easier. There are a lot of situations like this. Speaking of Yoshi, his rocket can do much the same thing the Grenade Duck does. The two weapons are pretty interchangeable. However, the reason I've highlighted Icy Peach and her Grenade Duck specifically is because Icy Peach's Grenade Duck is by far the strongest source of chip damage, which is the collective term for these two weapons. Which means she can deal damage a lot faster and easier. Additionally, Icy Peach is prone to getting walled out a lot because she has a strong weapon and a lot of HP, so she can beat most things at close range. But her weapon is close range too, so if she gets walled out, she can't use her weapon. But you can use her Grenade Duck just fine, very easily in fact. Additionally, so not only does she get lots of opportunities to deal chip damage, and her chip damage is a lot more potent than most other characters, but she also is one of those characters that benefits a lot from chip damage. Because here's the thing. If her Royal Gaze can land a kill shot, her opponent actually has very few ways of dealing with it. If she can shoot her opponent, and then use Royal Gaze at close range, a double critical strike, a critical strike from her weapon, and then a critical strike from her reaction shot, deals 156 damage. For some characters, this is still a kill shot, such as Rabbid Yoshi. But for a lot of others, it just misses, such as Rabbid Mario. If their opponent can just run away, it's not very effective, is it? However, if she gets even a little bit of damage on most characters, suddenly this is a kill shot, and her opponent has a very hard time of dealing with that. So Icy Peach, not only does she get lots of opportunities to deal chip damage, and not only is her chip damage more potent than most other characters, but she also benefits a lot from chip damage. So she is easily the poster child for chip damage in this game. On the other hand, we now turn our attention to Healer Rabbid Peach. Her star ability this time is Heal. Here's the thing. Most characters can outdamage her healing. It's not like the main game. However, if your opponent is limited to only, say, chip damage, now suddenly it's a competition. Remember, chip damage deals a little bit of damage, but even a little bit of damage can still be very useful. It can make characters easier to KO, it can get them in important KO ranges, and so on and so forth. Heal can shut that down pretty quickly. And if a little bit of damage can go a long way, a little bit of healing can also go a long way. The reason Healer Rabbid Peach is the highlight here is because she is by far the best healer in the game at healing your entire team. I mean, that's what she does. She is the healer. Now, the next set worth mentioning is Explosive Rabbid Mario and his Magnet Dance. And not for the reasons you'd think. Here's the thing. Magnet Dance pulls opponents away from cover, even if they're very far away. If you pull someone away from cover, not only does this make them vulnerable for a turn, obviously, but it also forces them to waste an action ticket, putting them back next turn. That already sounds pretty solid, I would think. Because sure, Rabbid Mario can't take advantage of that new position because his range is so short, but his teammates probably can. But there's a lot more than Magnet Dance than just that. Oh boy. First off, you can move multiple characters at once, which not only makes multiple characters vulnerable, it also forces your opponent to take 2 or even 3 action tickets to fix all of their positions, which is a massive ticket waster. It could massively swing the momentum in your favor if your opponent can't use their tickets. And, if you have a reaction shot active, Magnet Dance can pull them straight through it. Hey, remember how Steely Stare is one of the strongest reaction shots in the game on the multi-draw set? Yeah, now you can force them to actually face that. So Magnet Dance actually does a lot in versus mode. Okay, why can't you just stay outside of Magnet Dance range? That's very, very hard to do. The thing is, Magnet Dance has a range of 10 cells in versus mode, which is ridiculously big. It's the same range as all other secondary techniques, and the same range as most weapons. Which means, if you're outside of Magnet Dance range, you're also outside the range of most weapons, which means you can't shoot Rabbid Mario, and you're outside the range of all techniques other than Steely Stare, which means you can't use techniques on Rabbid Mario either. There are very few things that actually threaten him at that range. In fact, the main benefit of Rocket is its long range, because it's one of the few weapons that can actually hurt him on that range. And other characters that can do similar things. Which means it's very difficult to play around this. And if you get hit with a Magnet Dance, there's not really much you can do about it a lot of the time. So that's what makes Rabbid Mario so potent. Magnet Dance can very easily ruin your opponent's positions and waste their tickets, and it only costs a single action ticket to do. And it's on a one-turn cooldown, by the way. Scaredy Rabbid Yoshi can do similar stuff. However, Scaredy Rabbid is harder to take advantage of. There are some teams that prefer it, though. It has all the same properties as Magnet Dance otherwise, though. So it is still very strong, and it's good for a lot of the same reasons. Now, there is one last thing I want to talk about regarding character abilities. That being movement damage. I mentioned earlier that movement damage is great in Versus mode. And sure, Big Stomp is pretty clearly referencing that. But here's the thing. Most characters' only source of movement damage is their dash. And dashes have one big limitation. If your opponent is outside of your movement range, you can't dash them, ever. Cleansing Stomp is under no such limitation. Not only do they just have to be within the team jump range of either of your teammates, but your teammate can move first. So if they're not within their team jump range, you can just move one of your teammates and get them within team jump range. Which means it's very easy to access Cleansing Stomp, a lot easier than most dashes. And Cleansing Stomp, 60 damage is a lot, especially since it's only one action ticket for moving. Additionally, there is a class of abilities that I haven't shown off yet, namely Weaken and Protection. These abilities are very good at shutting off weapons. I mean, look at this. 90% damage reduction. You basically can't use your weapons if Rabbid Luigi uses this. Protection is not any better. 80% reduction. For some characters, they can be completely shut down by this. Icy Peach, for example. If she can't use her weapon, she doesn't really have much. However, Weaken and Protection can't block movement damage, which means Big Stomp can still break through these abilities, because he doesn't rely on his weapon, even though his weapon is still very good. So Big Stomp Mario is a great example of why you don't have to rely on your weapon, and why the fact that you don't have to rely on your weapon is very useful, because you just have so many more options on your turn. Another thing I want to go over is the map selection in Versus mode. There are only 4 maps, but they do differ in their own ways. Let's go over them one by one. Alright. And welcome to the first map of Versus mode, which is our most played on map in the Versus server by far, Pipe Up. Now, Pipe Up has a couple of features that set it apart from other maps. The first feature is its namesake, the pipes. Now, you would think that Versus mode maps, because they have a new feature to play around with, that being trampolines, they would use trampolines to help increase their movement a lot. However, Pipe Up actually doesn't have any trampolines. Instead, it uses pipes to facilitate movement. Which is definitely pretty interesting. Or at least it makes it unique among the maps. Now, these pipes, obviously they greatly help out with movement options, both offensive and defensive. Basically, all of the pipe exits are good cells to be in. Like, you can use either one and probably be in a good spot. But again, they can be used both offensively and defensively, depending on the situation. If you are trying to run away from your opponent, for example, and both of you can enter the same pipe, you will both have the same movement radius afterwards, which means they will always be able to catch you. So pipes actually don't work for running away, unless you're in a scenario where you can reach the pipe and your opponent can't. In this case, you have the pipe's entire exit radius all to yourself, which is extremely relevant for these pipes in the center and these pipes along the sides. So, it's a blessing and a curse. It can help you get closer quickly, or it can help you run away. However, the more impactful feature on this map is a less obvious one. There is full cover everywhere. The pipes themselves are full cover that's also completely unbreakable. These giant stone pillars, they're also full cover that's unbreakable. In fact, if you stand in the center, you actually out of sight a lot of shots, which is relevant because you can't be hit by the rocket or by the grenade duck if you're standing in the center, which is very relevant because that's one of the very few times the rocket and grenade duck can't hurt you, even if that's a little niche sometimes. Even the breakable cover is still full cover on the ground level. Now granted, the full cover can be trap cover, and I'll take some time to explain this because this is true of all versus maps. All breakable full cover can be trap cover. If you'll recall from the main game, it's possible for cover to secretly be explosive cover that just takes a few hits before it reveals itself. Like, there's no way to know it's explosive cover until it suddenly reveals itself after being hit a few times. It's kind of annoying, and guess what? It not only is it in versus mode too, it's actually even worse. Because which cover is explosive is completely RNG. Like, the game will randomize which cover is explosive. Now, how the randomization works on this map specifically is that of the 14 breakable full covers, 3 of them are secretly explosive freeze cover, 3 of them are secretly explosive vamp cover, and the other 8 are normal. Remember, even if they're explosive cover, they still take 3 hits to go down. And freeze and vamp, all things considered, are not that crazy of super effects to have. Freeze can be sometimes, but vamp not as much. So realistically, despite that, the cover is still very good across the board. Oh yeah, when showtime hits, all of the cover will be 1 hit away from breaking, which means all of the explosive cover will reveal itself. So, despite the trap cover fiasco, this trap cover is actually less impactful on this map than it is on other maps, but you still need to know it. And despite all of that, this map still has lots of very good full cover. For this reason, it's much easier to hold defensive positions on this map than other maps. Now you might think this map just leans heavily defensive, and yes, this map does lean into the more defensive style of gameplay. However, it is still very, very possible to approach your opponent on this map. First and foremost, these pipes, yes, they can help defensively, but if you're holding a defensive position, there's often not very many places to go to. The pipes are almost always strictly bad for you. These pipes in the sides, you can very easily use these to go from, like, say, this area, and then just flank your opponent using them. Or just go to the side so you can threaten several options at once. Like, the pipes tend to be better for breaking defensive positions rather than keeping them. So this game does help you out there. Additionally, the fact this map has lots of full cover everywhere can also help you approach, funnily enough. Because this allows you to get closer to your opponent and still be safe from them, because you have very good cover. So it is still very possible to approach on this map. The main thing you need to know, though, is how to hit, is that things such as grenade ducks and rockets that can hit through full cover, and things such as Magnet Dance and Scaredy Rabbid that move your opponent away from full cover, those are measurably stronger on this map, because you're dealing with full cover a lot more often. And that's really the thing you need to know when team building, is that your opponent will likely have cover and you will need to work around that. However, the fact there is lots of cover also gives you lots of positioning options. Because positioning yourself such that you can reach pipes is pretty important. There's also lots and lots of areas that you have lots and lots of options for a defensive position because there's cover everywhere. So there's a lot more positions that you have to worry about. There's a lot going on in this map behind the scenes. Like, there's a reason why this is our most played map. However, one thing that I do need to report, oh yeah, this map doesn't have any fancy showtime effects. Yes, all the cover will be one hit away from breaking. That even includes all of this cover up here, on top of the high ground, which is the only high ground on this map. But this map doesn't have any other showtime effect. It's just cover breaking, which makes it less crazy than other maps. However, one annoying feature of this map is that it is actually slightly asymmetrical. Now, something you see is that on the left here, I have picked the same team in the same order. First Mario, then Rabbid Peach, then Rabbid Luigi. These are the first 3 characters on the character select. I have picked the same 3 characters in the same order for player 1 and player 2. You can confirm this on the left side of the screen right now. Look at where these characters have spawned to start the game. Rabbid Peach spawned in the middle and slightly further up. This is very relevant. She can reach these positions without needing to spend her team jump. The other 2 characters cannot. They need to team jump off of her to reach these positions. The fact that Rabbid Peach doesn't need to spend her team jump is relevant because aside from it being easier to reach them, she can also team jump from a character that's already here and get even further up. She can also just stay here because this itself is a good defensive position, much better than these back 2, and etc. Which character spawns in the center is very relevant. For player 1, it is the second character that gets selected, that in this case Rabbid Peach, that spawns here. But for player 2, it's the third character that gets selected. Rabbid Luigi in this case. So the order in which you select characters on this map not only matters, it also changes depending on whether you're player 1 or player 2. That's a little annoying, but that's not really a big deal. You just have to know which side you're spawning on. The bigger deal are these 4 cells right here, and the other 4 cells on the other side. You'll notice these 4 cells do not exist on the player 2 side of the map. They just don't exist. They're out of bounds. On the player 1 side of the map, they very much do exist. So this map is actually slightly asymmetrical, period. Player 1 just has a larger starting area than player 2. This isn't relevant most of the time, but we have recently found some scenarios where this is relevant in some matchups, largely based around Scaredy Rabbid from certain positions. Which means, if you fight me on the server, I like to randomize who gets player 1 and who gets player 2 because of these positions. So it's not usually impactful, but it's worth mentioning. But make no mistake, this is our most played map for a reason. Yes, there's cover everywhere, and that does lead to more defensive stuff, but that also leads to a lot of creative solutions to the cover, and a lot of things that would only be possible because of it. There's a lot, so like I said, there's a lot going on this map behind the scenes. And the full cover is really just the star of the show here. You have to know about that when building and when playing. Alright, moving on to map number 2, Trampoline Alley. This map is weird in a lot of ways. Now, this map, in my opinion, is mostly characterized by different zones. There are 3 real zones you need to worry about. First is the center. Now, the thing about the center is that defense is, shockingly bad in the center. This is because... Okay, first off, this is the first map we're seeing with trampolines. And because there are trampolines everywhere on this map, this is the inaugural map for trampolines, any character that can make good use of trampolines gets significantly buffed. The center also has trampolines. The thing is, if you actually look at the center, you'll notice that every single tile on the center can reach at least one, and usually both, trampolines. Which means, if you are in the center, you can go to anywhere else in the center with only one movement. Which means you have ridiculously good movement in the center. And the cover in the center isn't very good. Sure, you got this full cover in the center, and you got the unbreakable cover near the pipes. That's kind of about it, and it's kind of still pretty awkward because you're kind of facing each other if that happens. These half covers don't last very long, because first off, they're wooden cover. All the half cover on this map is wooden cover, which means it breaks in 2 hits instead of the usual 3. And again, it's half cover. It only has a 50-50 chance of actually working. As such, defense is very bad. As such, defense isn't very good in this section of the map. This map is all about scrapping with your opponent if you're here. The second zone are these 2 high grounds on either end of the map. Now, this is pretty much the polar opposite of the center. You got some genuinely good cover with this yes breakable but full cover still up here, and you can see a large portion of the map, and it's actually pretty hard to get up here. Your only options are either these jump pads, these trampolines. You could normal team jump to get up here, which isn't much better, or these pipes. Yeah, the thing about these pipes is that they only open up in the second half of the game. Once showtime happens, these pipes open up and you can now take them. But for the first 4 turns, they don't open. Even when they're open, it's actually pretty hard to assault this area, because the people who are up here can shoot the characters down here pretty easily, because they won't have cover, but the ones up here will. Here's the funny part. Remember, this is breakable full cover, and this map has trap cover too. And yes, this cover can be trap cover. Was the trap cover on this map? Well, there are 11 pieces of breakable full cover. 5 of them are normal. 3 of them will become honey explosive, and the last 3 will become ink explosive. So yeah, honey and ink, that's pretty nasty. Especially since there are fewer cover on this map, which means there's higher odds for your cover to be explosive. And guess what? Even if this is explosive cover, it's still genuinely pretty good, because it's in a pretty good spot. Like, you will see characters regularly using explosive cover, even if it's up here, because that's just how good this spot is to be for snipers. So yeah, you got this area in the center, which defense isn't really a thing. You got this area up here, where range is much more important, because, yeah, you can regularly outrange characters if you're up here, by the way. Especially if you want the high ground bonus. So this area up here where range is important, and it's very difficult to assault up here easily. And then you got the areas on the sides, which are kind of in between. They're you're more likely to have cover if you're on the sides, but it's also almost certainly going to be half cover, because most of the cover here is half cover. And you also don't have that much better ways of accessing up here. Sure, you can get to the middle easier, because this trampoline gives you to the middle, which most characters use at the beginning of the match anyway. But yeah, so those are your real 3 zones. This area up here that heavily prioritizes all-out offense, this sniper's peak on the 2 sides, and then there's these side areas that just kind of connect them. I guess that's really a good way to summarize this map. Yeah. Oh yeah, one more thing there is to mention. That being starting positions. First off, this map is 180-degree rotationally symmetric. The only sort of asymmetry is that this cover right here doesn't match this side. It's the same thing over here, but the cover is always on the left. However, the starting positions are worth mentioning. Now, the first character you select will always be farther away from the center and just farther away from everything else compared to the other 2 characters. In this case, yeah, Mario. For player 2, it is also Mario. Thankfully, it is the same for both characters this time. This is relevant in a few scenarios. Usually, it's because the character that has a long-range weapon takes refuge here, which is a very common opening move. And if they do that, then their long-range weapon can hit these 2 characters, but not the back one. So this character is slightly better defensively at the beginning of the game. Just keep that in mind. Overall, that's pipe up. You got these 3 areas that all prioritize different things, which makes it kind of really hard to gain a significant advantage if you and your opponent are in different areas. And it makes matches here play out weirdly, because we're not entirely sure of the implications of all 3 of these areas. They're just pasted together like this. Regardless, yeah, that's Trampoline Alley. Map number 3. Nowhere to Hide. This map is paradoxical in a lot of ways. Now, this map, for example, by area, this is the largest versus map at 27 by 27. Strictly larger or the same size than all of the other maps. However, it doesn't feel like that when playing. That's because most of that area is empty space. See, there's a lot of empty space around the sides and in the middle of the arena. You got these little islands that you hop between and all that kind of stuff. So in practice, this doesn't tend to feel like that. These islands aren't very big. Like, they're really not. So it tends to feel a lot more cramped than other maps. Especially because of how this map is designed. These starting areas don't come into play very often. Vast majority of the time, players will just enter these pipes and never come back unless they get desperate. And if they get desperate, it usually doesn't end well for them. Yeah. So player characters effectively start in here after like the first turn or 2. However, you see, here's the thing. If player 2 goes to this area very quickly, and player 1 goes to this area very quickly, as is very common, the 2 areas are very close together if you haven't noticed. Like, your enemy is right on top of you. Range, not really an issue on this map. Like, the two teams are right next to each other. Most even on the first turn. You can't really go back because where are you going to go back to? So teams very often have their back against the wall, and you can very easily just get right into your opponent's area and then just start fighting. Like, scrapping is very very common on this map because you're always very close together. Oh yeah, this area in the center, right here, this mostly serves as a speed bump between the 2 areas. You cannot go from pipe to pipe, so you have to spend at least 1 turn in the middle from going area to area. At least initially. If you'll notice, this map's trampolines aren't active until showtime. In the first half of the map, they don't exist. But once showtime hits, trampolines happen, and oh boy, does this map get hectic. You'll notice, first and foremost, you can go from this pipe to this trampoline into this area within a single action. So you can very, very easily get from place to place on this map. But guess what? It's even worse. That's because, if you'll notice, these trampolines tend to be in the center of these islands. Similar to how on Trampoline Alley in the center, the trampolines in the middle means you can get from anywhere to anywhere else very often. That's also the case here. Getting from island to island can be tricky, but if you want to stay on the same island, you can go from anywhere to anywhere. So you have lots of movement and not a very large area. It's very hard to hold the defensive position under those circumstances. Now I know you might think, oh, but there's lots of full cover. Didn't you praise Pipe Up for having lots of full cover that made defensive position better? And yes, there's lots of full cover. It does not last. First and foremost, this cover breaks after 2 hits instead of the usual 3. It's wooden cover. Second off, the cover is very close together, so area of effect attacks will often hit multiple pieces of cover, destroying them all in a single blow. Boom shots do this all the time. And here's the thing, and again, trap cover is also a thing on this map. There are 24 pieces of full cover. 8 of them are trap instead of the usual 6. 4 of them will become push cover, and the other 4 will become bounce cover. And if you'll notice, a lot of this cover is right next to the edge. It is very common for for this cover to just shoot you off the edge depending on where it is and what kind of cover it is. So in all, the cover is deceptively not that great, especially as the match goes on. The cover starts breaking, and suddenly it just opens even. So there's a lot of scrapping on this map. There's also a lot of trampoline play on this map. Although they don't activate until the second half, rather until showtime, there's still a lot of trampoline play that goes on because they're everywhere. Actually, even more trampoline play goes on than Trampoline Alley in a lot of cases. However, there is one area I didn't talk about yet, and that's Sneak Peek, or the real center area. This area is canonically called Sneak Peek because it's in the description of the map. Now, this top area right here, this might seem like a really good sniping spot. And to be fair, it kind of is. It's complicated. You see, now, on paper, yes, you can see everywhere. And you can see everywhere from a single spot on this map, and you get high ground bonus. That's always very good. And you get full cover. That's always very nice. However, there's always a catch. Remember, all of the cover that's up here is breakable. And yes, you can see everyone. Everyone can also see you. So the cover up here very commonly does just break. And once that happens, you have no shelter. And your sniper is probably just pelted by everything you have. Because why wouldn't they be? It's also Also, you might think like, oh, but it's hard to get up to this area, right? Well, not really. Because this trampoline actually makes it all the way to this top area. So, once showtime hits, this area is no longer safe, realistically speaking. These side areas right here, obviously they're less useful because you have way worse visibility, but they are safer. Because you can use this wall as cover, and it won't break. This is some of the very, very few unbreakable cover on this map, is this wall right here. It's some of the very, very few unbreakable, useful cover. And there's trampolines, because of course there is. So yeah, if you have a character that does like distance play, this area can work for them. But it's not foolproof, because again, you can assault these areas very easily using the jump once the jump pads become active. And in a lot of cases, it does tend to come down to scraps. Like I said, this map is paradoxical in some ways. It looks giant, but the areas are all very cramped. And yeah, this is the map for scrapping because of these areas, but it also has the most well-defined sniper area of any map, realistically. And yeah. Once again, this is an unusual map. I know I say that a lot, but yeah, this map has a kind of a unique character to it. Also, these starting areas, this map is perfectly symmetrical, no asterisks. It's symmetrical along a diagonal axis, which can make it look weird sometimes, but it is perfectly 100% symmetrical. And the starting positions actually don't matter very much. Because, yeah, first off, yeah, they're mirror symmetrical. And because characters almost always enter this pipe anyway, it's very rare for starting positions to actually mean anything. I mean, if you want to start in this area, which does happen sometimes, then it might mean things. The later characters you select will be closer to this area, but for the most part, it doesn't really matter what characters you select if you're not going for that area. And now, for the final destination of Mario plus Rabbids Versus, make haste slowly. Map number 4. Now, this map's unique feature are these ice covers. Remember, ice cover will always break in one hit, and all of the breakable cover, whether half or full, is ice. This poses some unique features. For one, ice cover can't be trap cover, which means this map actually doesn't have trap cover at all. The only versus map that's like this. Second, Showtime. Normally during Showtime, all of the cover will go one hit from breaking. But if you'll recall, ice cover is always one hit from breaking, because it always breaks in one hit. On this map only, when Showtime happens, all of the cover on the map will instantly break. All of the cover that isn't permanent, like these things over here, will instantly break. This is a very different map before and after Showtime. Now, before Showtime, the cover here is actually pretty decent, despite it breaking very easily. It's in some pretty good spots, so it actually functions like pipe up in some instances. There's a defensive position over here. Now, you actually can't walk to this area normally because there's this giant wall here, and the only way you can actually get to this area on foot is by going around through this pipe and then coming out this one. Interestingly enough. Which is why you can hold a defensive position over here, but you can also just team jump over this wall if you want, or use Yoshi's ground pound to break this. Couple options. You could set up a defensive position over here as well, is one idea. You could also just go straight through this pipe. The pipes connect diagonally, by the way. You could also just go straight through this pipe and immediately attack your opponent. Like, you have options. And there are multiple ways you could hold good defensive positions on this map. Only before Showtime. Once Showtime hits, defensive positions go out the window. Largely because there are very few obstacles left on this map. The half cover is not actually all that good, because it's everywhere. So similar to Pipe Up, it helps you advance, and it can help you hold defensive positions, but it can also just help your opponent reach you safely. And because it's only half cover, it's not all that good defensively. Like, it really isn't. So, yeah. The pipes themselves do provide full cover, but they're also right in the center of the map, and they also facilitate huge movement, which, as we've seen, just encourages scrapping. And that's basically what happened in this map. Once Showtime hits, this turns into one large scrapping fest, where you're kind of in an endgame-like situation almost instantly, and you have to just get rid of your opponent as fast as you can. Or as reliably as you can, rather. Now, this might just seem like a run-of-the-mill scrapping, but scrapping here is actually fundamentally different than any other map. This map does not have jump pads, and does not have good cover. Pipe Up has good cover, but no jump pads. And the other two maps have jump pads. So this is the only map that doesn't have either. Which means this is actually the best map for dashes, or dashing characters. Because not only is there no obstacles to really block your view, and there's nowhere to run because the map is not very big. My cursor's stuck. Because the map is not very big. But you don't have jump pads to worry about for your opponent to escape with. And so all movement damage is either from a manual team jump or from dashes. And that's kind of how this map is. No tricks, no tricks, no fancy terrain, nothing. Just a wide open field with occasionally a piece of half cover with you and your opponent. That's just how this map is. There aren't even really any other meaningful features of this map. They do exist, but they're not super notable. It's just, that's how this map is. Spawning order also doesn't really matter very much, because most of this area is blocked off by that wall. So the characters have virtually the same starting area. Technically, it's a little different regarding this area over here. Like, character number 3 can reach this area, but the other two characters can't. They have to team jump. But team jumping really doesn't matter this early on. Regardless, so spawning order doesn't really matter. And it is also, again, perfectly symmetrical between player 1 and player 2. And well, again, there's no trap cover, so there's nothing really to mention on that front either. There's not really much to this map. That's just kind of the map it is. And that's make Haste slowly. It is the final destination of Versus because there's no obstacle, because there's few obstacles, just you and your opponent. And finally, the rule set. There are 6 options here that you can customize. Now, the first one determines whether items show up or not. I'll go over the mechanics of items later, but for now, this is just how you turn them on and off. Now, you can actually set a timer for how long turns will take. If the timer hits 0, then the player's turn is automatically passed. A long timer will give you 180 seconds per person per turn. This is again regardless of how many characters you have or how many action tickets you have left. It is always 180 seconds at the start of your turn until you pass. Medium length gives you 120 seconds to take your turn, and short length gives you only 45 seconds to take your turn. Or you can turn turn limit off, which doesn't give you a timer at all. Max turns. I explained turn limit earlier. Max turns is how long the turn limit is before you go into overtime. You can either set it to 7 turns, 10 turns, or no limit at all. Showtime, you can turn Showtime off if you want. If you turn Showtime off, Showtime effects will never occur. You can choose who goes first, you can have someone guaranteed to go first, or you could decide it randomly, in which case you get the coin flip. And you can also give one player a health bonus if you want them to have a handicap. This is similar to extra health mode in the original game, where one player will get a 50% boost to their character's max HP at the start. It's very difficult to beat a competent player if you give them a health boost. Now then, I think it's high time we talk about items, because we've been putting it off for so long, and now we need to talk about them. How items work. If you turn on items, then there will be item boxes strewn throughout the map. If you collect one of these item boxes by moving through it. This can either be because your movement happens to go through it, or the much easier method, just press A on the thing, and your character will get it automatically while they move. This looks like a dash, but it isn't, because you can still dash. You can even get multiple items in one turn. It is completely pointless, but you can. This does mean you cannot stop on this cell. However, if you team jump, you can actually land on this cell, and this will collect the item. Additionally, if you have a sentry, you can also use a sentry to collect the item. You just need to move. You just need to have something you control move through this item. You cannot shoot through it, though, sadly. Now, as for how you actually use items. The item action is separate from your movement, weapon, and techniques. It is its own thing. You can hold one item at a time, which is shared between all characters, and after you use an item, you consume it. Let's use an item. As you can see, we no longer have the item. However, you'll also see that we didn't use an action ticket. Using an item does not consume an action ticket, unlike other things in Versus. Now, as for what the items themselves actually do. Once you use an item, you can collect a new item, do all that kind of stuff, and so forth. If you pass the turn, then all item boxes will respawn, unless a character is standing on top of them, Luigi. In that case, the item won't respawn until the character moves. Now, as for what the items themselves actually do, the game actually does a good job of explaining what they do. The tickets are now the extra move, extra attack, and extra technique. These are some of the more complicated tickets. Some of the more complicated items. I call them the extra tickets. How these work is that these effectively give you an extra action ticket, either for movement, for attacks, or for techniques, respectively. As you can now the item I used earlier was an extra attack. I used that on Rabbid Peach. So if I then use Rabbid Peach's attack action, as you can see, that did not use up an action ticket. I already used one action ticket earlier for the movement, and using the weapon did not consume an action ticket. Now, what you might find strange is that Rabbid Peach can attack a second time if she wants to. This is one of the weird features of action tickets. Of the extra tickets. Is that they kind of ignore the usual restrictions for these things. If you use extra attack, you can attack twice with the same character in the same turn. If you use extra technique, then you can use two techniques in the same turn. And if you use extra move, you can move twice in the same turn. Now you don't necessarily have to. Like, for example, I have an extra move ticket right now. I already used Rabbid Peach's movement. I can use this again to allow her to move a second time, or I can use this on someone else, and so forth. The catch is, whenever you use one of these tickets, the next action you take of this type will not use an action ticket. Like, if I use an extra move on Rabbid Peach, the next movement that Rabbid Peach uses will not use an action ticket, and again, she can double up and do all that kind of stuff with it. There is one restriction, though. For extra technique, you can use both of your techniques, but you cannot use the same technique twice. Similarly, you cannot use secondary weapons twice. You can use primary weapons twice, as you can see here, but you cannot use. But if I had used the sentry instead, I would not be able to use the sentry again. Anything that has a cooldown, you cannot use more than once in the same turn, no matter what. That should more or less cover the tickets. Oh yeah, if you've already used your thing, for example, I already moved with Rabbid Peach, I can then use the extra move to allow her to move again. That should cover the extra tickets. The other items are generally a lot easier to explain. Cooldown reset just resets all the cooldowns on the hero to 0. No, you cannot use this and then a ticket to use a cooldown technique twice in one turn, sadly. Super Cleanser cleans all the lingering super effects, namely Vamp, Freeze, Honey, Ink, all of it's Ink, and Stone. Mushroom just gives you a flat 50 HP. Now, here's the thing. First off, let's show off that if you pass the turn, the item boxes respawn. However, again, any items that, if you're standing on item box, it does not respawn. However, if showtime happens, all the item boxes become rainbow. They're called super item boxes. Visually, they act exactly the same as normal item boxes. However, the items you can get are different. The only item that appears in both kinds of item box is the mushroom. The other items you can get only from super boxes are Mover Booster. This gives you +3 cells to your movement range, pipe exit range, team jump range, and any trampoline ranges. And it gives you a 50% boost to all movement damage. Now, one thing I forgot to mention is that if you use one of these 3 extra tickets, you cannot get the same ticket later in the turn. I had used an extra attack, so I couldn't get an extra attack in the same turn. However, that doesn't apply to Mover Booster. You can get this as many times as you want, and it will stack with itself. Most of these stack with themselves. It's just that the ticket don't. Damage boost is the same way. This does stack with itself, and however, it's mostly just its M-Power reskinned. it gives one character 100% increase to weapon damage. Rainbow Shield is completely busted. How this works is this gives you a 100-100 shield that does not break and also blocks super effects. Attacking a character that has this shield is almost completely pointless because they won't take any damage and you can't even use a super effect to stop them. The only way to harm a character that has a rainbow shield is if they just so happen to stand next to explosive cover, then the explosive cover breaks. The explosive cover can't super affect them, but it can harm them because the shield doesn't block hazard damage. No shield does. But otherwise, it's just a very, very strong shield ability that blocks super effects. Super Guarantee is a one character super chance. I should hope you know how super chance works. And then there's Triple Threat. Triple Threat is the rarest item by far. Now, the item is rubber band. So if you are behind in the game, then you will get stronger items and vice versa. Triple Threat will only show up if you are down 2 characters and only have 1 character left, and your opponent has all 3 of theirs. This Triple Threat, as the visual implies, is basically just an extra move, extra attack, and extra technique duct taped together. Funnily enough, while you cannot get 2 of the same type of extra ticket in the same turn, you can get an extra attack and then get a triple threat later. These are considered different items. There's not really much else to say about triple threat. I already explained these 3, so it's, like I said, it's just like you're using all 3 of these items at the same time. And that should be everything. This game does not have online, which can make finding an opponent rather difficult. Us in the Discord server, Mario and Rabbid's Discord server specifically, have found a workaround. If you want to play with us, the link is in the description. If you want to just watch some versus matches, the link will also be in the description for a playlist of versus matches I've played. And yeah. I don't normally do long videos like this. This took a lot of effort to put together. But if you want to see more videos like this on stuff like versus or whatever, let me know and I'll see what I can do. That's all. Bye.